In today's video, we're going to be making cope and stick profile flat panel doors on the router table. It's not as hard as you think. There are some things that you need to know and some things that you need to set up before you start to route out these profiles and make these doors, but I'm going to show you everything right now. All right, let's get started. Okay, so there's a few things that I want to go over here at the router table before we start to make the cope and stick doors, because these measurements and parts that we have to make and scrap pieces are very important to this. Number one, you need to know what set you're working with, because that's going to dictate what material you can use. This set from Freud, and this is not a sponsored video, but I will post the link for this. I bought this with my own money. I've been using this for years on cope and stick doors. It works great because it's adjustable. Listen to me, this is very important. It is imperative that you get a set that is adjustable. Why do I say it's very important to get an adjustable set? Because not all of your center panels, whether you're using plywood or MDF or HDF or whatever you're going to use for your center panel, they are not the sizes that they tell you they are in the stores. Even if you're dealing with a hardwood dealer, a plywood supplier, or your local big box store, you are not getting half-inch plywood, you're not getting quarter-inch, you're not getting those sizes at all. Making maple cope and stick doors, and maple is, you can see here, I got some scraps. I milled it down, which is important also. Make sure that you mill your stock down yourself so that it's nice and dry and straight, and you can see this thing is pinned straight. So this door is not going to warp and twist on me. Okay, so that's going to be a nice, perfectly flat door. I have the thickness down to 19 millimeters, which is also translated imperial. That is 3/4 of an inch thick. You can make your doors a little bit thicker if you want. A lot of people do 7/8, but I feel that's a very heavy door, and I mill it down to 3/4 or 19 millimeter. 19 millimeter and 3/4 are actually equal on the tape measure. So I got two pieces of scrap here. One shorter than the other. This is going to represent our rail. I'll cut this down also later on to a smaller piece, because these scrap blocks that we make now are going to be our adjustment blocks for the future. So I'm going to do this. I have blocks already set up that I've used in the past, and you can see right here. Here's one of them. This is already milled and perfectly ready to set up, like the stick bit. I'll call it the stick bit, right? That's the one that cuts the inside profile and the slot for your panels. Right now, I have the cope bit set up in the router. The cope bit is gonna cut, if you look on here, on this set, it actually tells you what it does. The cope bit is gonna cut the profile with the tongue to go into the groove to give you that like mortise and tenon type of joint for the door. So first thing we gotta do is get our milled up stock that we're using, get a couple of pieces of scrap. Then we got to put our coping bit in the router first. And I'm going to show you how we're going to set that up. Okay, so I went off topic for a second here about the coping bit, but for the stick bit, which cuts not only the profile, but also cuts the slot for your center panel, I was talking about the nominal sizes that you get for those panels. So I'm working with an MDF panel, because this is paint grade, and I love MDF for center panels on paint grade because they stay so perfectly straight and they keep the door straight over long periods of time from warping and twisting. The MDF panel I have is 3/8 of an inch thick, or exactly 5 millimeters. Now, if I was to use a half an inch, say from Home Depot, they sell half-inch MDF, okay? You will get that MDF in half an inch. However, if you are working with a half-inch plywood panel, you are not getting half-inch plywood. It's going to be less. And if you look at the measurements that they give you for half-inch, it's like 15-30 seconds. I don't know what 15-30 seconds is, but it's not half an inch, it's less. So if you're working with a 1/4 inch, what they call a 1/4 inch plywood, you're going to get a 5 or a 6 millimeter piece of plywood. It's not going to be a 1/4 of an inch. So if you go and you leave this set up the way it comes from the factory, you're going to have a slot that has a lot of slop in it, and your panel's going to rattle, and you're going to have to buy those what they call space balls to put in there. And it's just an extra step that you don't want, and you don't want a rattling panel. So that's why I say get the adjustable set, because you can remove these blades on here and you can take out washers and you can compress and make the slot smaller to the exact size you need. That's why I made a few test cuts in the past with this after removing about 4 washers from it, and it wound up being perfect. So then I had to take this off and remove the washer from there, and that made the tongue that it cuts fit perfectly into the groove. So not only are you going to have a good tongue and groove joint, you're also going to have the perfect size slot for your center panel. All right, with all that being said, now let's move on to cutting some of the scraps. We're going to start with the cope. Okay, so I have the cope bit in the router, and you can determine the cope bit not only if it doesn't tell you on your router bit set, then you'll know by the bearing being in the center of the 2 cutter heads. The stick bit, which cuts the slot and the profile, it has these 2 cutter heads on the bottom of the bearing, and then underneath is the profile. So you have a top mounted bearing for the stick bit, and you have a middle centered bearing for between the 2 cutter heads for the coping bit. Now you can see here that I've determined which face I want as the front of my door. You can see I mark it with a little arrow right there. The face has to go face side down on the router table. You have to have your face side down because that's where your profile is going to be cut. So what I do is I always mark a little arrow to the inside of where my door is going to be, where the panel is going to sit. I hope the camera's not washing that out because it's very bright in here, but I put a little arrow, and that not only indicates the face of the board, but it indicates the center panel is going to go into this side here. So that's where I want my slot cut. This is going to be the middle part of the door. So make sure you mark that down. Then we want to make sure that we get about a 10 millimeter or a 3/8 mark on this board from the face side, so that when you're putting this against the bit, we know where to set the cutter head. Okay, have my piece there. I'm going to mark out 10 millimeters. And now this gives me a standard of where, it's basically the center of the board, but it's going to give me a good standard of measurement of where I can position so that the 2 tabs on the side of the slots are at least, a few millimeters thick and they won't break off. This is going to give me about 5 millimeters of meat on each side, which is a nice, hefty style where it's not going to break or chip off. Sometimes if you make these too thin, if you move the cutter head, too much this way or too much this way, one is going to be very brittle and it'll just break on you. You don't want that. So I'm going to position it right there, and then I'm going to bring it to face down. I'm going to transfer that mark to the side here so that I can actually see against the cutter head where that's going to be. And so now what I want to do is position the top of this bottom cutter head right to my line, which I have it exactly set right there. Now, if you didn't have it set perfectly, you would raise or lower your bit until you got to that line. So hopefully right here you can see my mark, and I'm right at the top of that bottom cutter head right there. Next part right here is to move the fence in over the router bit. So the way I like to do this is to take a really good straight edge, bring this all the way in, past where the bearing is. Then you're going to take your straight edge, you're going to position it on the bearing, but you're going to be touching the fence first because you pulled the fence forward. So now you're going to just push the fence back until you make contact with that bearing. And now I'm making contact with the bearing and the fence. Once I have contact on all points, exactly where I want it, I'm going to lock the fence in place. Okay, there we go. Fence is in place. I roll this back and forth, and you should feel the straight edge just basically kissing that bearing. It's basically just riding right along that bearing, but it's not protruded outwards. Next thing we want to do, we have our mark here. That is where the face is, and that's got to go against the fence, and this has to go down against the table. So for the copes, you need to cope the end of the board. This would be, running it like this would be for when you do the stick bit. That's going to make the groove in the side. But right now, we know that this is the face. The only important part is the top and the bottom because that's where you're going to make your copes. Before we do this, First of all, it's going to go like this against the fence. We're going to run this through, and that's going to cut the cope on the end. Once we cut that cope, you're going to take it and you're going to spin it around, keeping that same face down. That's why it's important to mark the board. Then you're going to run it through here, this way. If you cut your first cope and then you flip the board end for end this way, you're going to have the cope on two different sides and nothing is going to line up and you can't make a door. You got to throw the piece out. Another tip that I want to give you is a lot of people, they'll get a miter gauge or a coping sled. You can just take a nice square piece of scrap, put it right against there just like that, and then run the piece through and it will come out perfect. I'll show you how to do it right now. Okay, so hopefully you've seen how easy that was. So now, not only do we have a profile of the cope, we now have a good measurement right here of what that tongue is going to be to fit inside the groove. Not only for the thickness to set up the sticking bit that cuts that slot, but measuring this from the shoulder of that tenon to the end right there is going to give us the amount of extra material that we need to add in when we get the measurements of our doors. For our total overall width of the doors, basically the way it's going to sit when it goes in here is like a tongue and groove. It's going to fit in just like that. Perfect, just like that. I'm going to show you how to cut this next with the sticking bit, but I just want to show you how these come together. See that profile right there? That's cut into it right there. So that's going to go in just like this, and it's going to fit right into that slot right there, just like that, creating the perfect tongue and groove. It's nice and flush there, flush on the back, perfect. Once you glue it in and then sand it down, everything's going to be completely hidden and perfect. And what we're going to do now is we need to get this measurement here so that we can actually figure out how long these rails need to be to get the overall width of our door. So I'll do it for you in metric and imperial. I'm working with metric because I'm building cabinets. So all my work is in metric with the cabinets, but if you're working in imperial, okay, so that shoulder to the tongue is 10 millimeters. 10 millimeters, I believe that translates to, if I'm not mistaken, should be 7/16. Let's see here, going to the tape. 10 millimeters is roughly 7/16. So 7/16, that's your measurement if you're working in imperial. So now we know that when we put these pieces together for the stile and the rail, I need to add in whatever the inside dimension is going to be of my rail. I have to add 10 millimeters on this side, 10 on that side, so I have to add 20 millimeters to that overall dimension when I do my math. If you are working in imperial, you need to add 7/16 and 7/16. 7/16, 7/16, 14/16, 7/8. I think that's right. 7/16, 7/16 should be 7/8. Still not as fast as 10 plus 10. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is loosen up the fence so that we can make the scrap for the sticking bit. So I'm just gonna back my fence up, get it out of the way. I'm gonna leave the router at the height temporarily that it's at right now because the bits, these bits in particular, they have a mark on the shank, which actually is the line that tells you where they want you to put the router bit in the router up to. Okay. Loosen that up. That's not a canary in the background. My router's a little bit rusty. It's squeaking. It's old. Okay, so on the shank of these bits, you may not be able to see it. It's very bright in here, but there's a line right there. And that is where they want you to mount that into the collar, or collet, I should say, the collet of the router. So this is a 1/2 inch shank, so I'm using a 1/2 inch collet. There's my line. I'm going to drop that in right to that line. That's going to kind of get me right in the ballpark of where the other router bit was, so we won't have to do too much movement on that. Now we got the sticking bit in there. What I want to do is take my scrap test piece and make sure that I have it face down. Now you can see the way this is going to work. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can get a closer look. So the way we got to do this now is we have to line up this cutter head to be perfect with the tongue. So it's off a little bit. What I'll do is raise up the router, get it close, and then start to bring the router down. And what I'm looking to do is get that cutter, the top of that cutter, lined up with the top of my tongue right there. That feels like it's perfect. I'm going to lock it in. Now remember, we're going to run a test piece just to make sure, because it might be slightly proud, but we're not sure until we run the piece. So you're going to take your coping piece, that's your setup block. Always keep this. Make sure that you know that this is a good piece by putting a check mark on it, okay? Put that off to the side. Definitely take this out. Get that out of the way. The way we're going to set up the fence for this is exactly the same way that we set up for the other one, only the bearing is a little more visible this time. So as I'll pull the fence forward, and as I do this, I can actually see a little bit better, but you can't. So I'm going to move the camera for you so you can see what I'm doing. That should be a better visual for you of what I'm doing. Hopefully my hands won't get in the way there. Okay, so here's the bearing. So I got the fence just proud of that. I want to push back on the fence with my straight edge just until I hit that bearing. Now you can see I'm perfectly in line with the bearing, and the two fences are hitting my straight edge. So now, while I have that perfectly in line, I'll lock the fence in over here, come to this side, and lock that side in. Now we're all set. We have our height, we have our fence set, getting our scrap, which we have marked right there, that's the face. That has to go down to the table, and this is the side that's going to go up against the fence. So take it, bring it down, and this here we're going to run straight through, just like this. I'm going to be using a push block, and I'm going to turn on the router and the dust collection. Okay, now I have both of my test pieces. This is my style, which is the sticking bit, which cuts the slot and the profile. And here is my cope scrap piece, and I'm gonna put those together. And what I'm looking for is a nice fit. That is a perfect fit. Just a little bit snug right in there, and what I'm really looking for is this is perfectly flush right here. So there'll be like no sanding involved. I mean, obviously you got to sand it anyway, you have to glue up, but this is absolutely perfectly flush. So I know that we have both of our bits set right, because every time I take these bits in and out of the router, what's going to happen is I'll be able to go ahead and set them up with these blocks, knowing that this is going to be the size of the material that I'm going to use. And then I can, when I have this bit in there, I can set the profile by putting the bit in and raising it and lowering it so that it fits perfectly over just like that. That's exactly how I'm going to set that up. And then when I have the coping bit in there, I'm going to set up my coping bit the exact same way. Now we can actually route out our material. Okay, so after you got your setup blocks all marked up so that you know what they are, I wrote on them face, the thickness and everything. And so this way I know which one's which. I have these set up now. These are like forever until I break them. So just put these off to the side somewhere. What I like to do is drill a hole through the both of them and tie a string through them, hang them on a nail somewhere in the corner, off, out of the way. I have my coping bit back in the router, and now I have all my rails cut to the size that I need. So now I have them all marked also. Put them all face down, run them through, spin it around, and then I'm gonna cope all my ends first. Once I get all the rails done, then I can switch the bit, and then we can run the stick through everything. Now I remove the coping bit, we're going to put the stick bit back in, cut the profile and the groove. Okay, so we ran all our styles through and we coped our rails. Now the last thing you need to do before you can call this done is take your rails again that are already coped on the end. Now you need to run the profile on the inside here. That's why I always mark that little arrow with the face even on the rails, because I need to know which side is going to be on the inside of the door. It's going to accept the panel. So now we'll just take that'll go up against our fence, and we'll run it through the sticking bit, and then our framework of the door will be done. Okay, I'm trying to get you the best angle possible here. So these are the rails. I'm going to run those into the style just like this. You can see that's a nice flush joint right there. I'll do the same on this end right here. Sometimes you gotta, move it off the bench a little bit, like lift it up a little, get it to sit in there. That tongue has to sit right in that groove. You can see it goes right in there perfectly. Okay, there we go. Nice little friction fit. All you gotta do is line up the ends. You don't have to really fuss with it too much because I'm not gluing it up yet. Everything nice and square. And it makes it a lot easier when you put the clamps on during the glue up. But this is just a little quick dry fit so that you can see what the door is going to look like after you run your rails and stiles with your coping bits. If you did it right, it should be perfectly square. And from corner to corner, we'll check the diagonals here. We've got 821 millimeters. Pull it from this side of the tape. Make sure you get it in the corner. 821 millimeters. That is absolutely perfect. I needed it to be 301. 301 on the money there. 301 on the money there. Now the stiles are the easy part. The length, you're just cutting off, to the length of the carcass that you need minus the 2 millimeter reveal on the top and the bottom. So I had 768. I just set up a stop block for all these parts, cut these to 764. These rails had to be cut to 209 millimeters, plus the tongues and the amount of the stiles here, which are 56 millimeters each. And so that gave me a total of 301, and that's what I needed for the bigger cabinet doors. Now here I zoomed in as much as I possibly could because I wanted you to see the joint here. So you have your profile, and there's your tongue, and here is the groove. And so this makes a really nice, strong glue joint. And you can see nice and flush. And then in the corners here, you should be able to see exactly how, when these come together, maybe I'll move it a little bit closer to the camera so that you can see how that corner actually on the inside looks like a profile that's been mitered in. But instead of being an applied molding on the inside later on, this is actually all built right into the stiles and rails. And just come apart just like that. And then you cut your center panel, and then you can glue everything up. Okay, so you can see that I have my door here on top of this. This is 3/8 MDF. This is going to be the center panel. So this kind of gives you an idea of what the door is going to look like when the panel is in it. It's a paint grade project, so 3/8 MDF I think is great for paint grade cabinet doors with the maple stiles and rails, because it makes for a really tough door, and the 3/8 is thicker than the 1/4 inch, and it's not as heavy as the 1/2 inch. So a lot of times also with the 1/2 inch, because of the width of your, or the thickness I should say, of your material, either you're working with 7/8 or 3/4 inch doors, 19 millimeter or 20 millimeter thickness, then when you make your groove, for a 1/2 inch, you have to back cut the panel, and that just makes it a little more involved in making the door. This speeds up the process because you can make your groove, have a centered groove on your stiles and rails, and not have to back cut this panel. It'll slide right in if you set your cutter heads on your router bit right. So what I'm going to do to show you how to measure the inside of the door before we cut the panels for it, it's real simple. A lot of people they get tripped up over this, and I think it's really simple. Just clamp your door together in the position that it's going to be. So you're just going to measure from side to side. When you have it clamped like this, it simulates that the door is glued up and tight. So that's going to be your best fitting right there. So I'm just going to look down, sight down on the inside here, and I got 189 millimeters in width. I know I need to add 10 for each side, for the panel to sit inside the groove, but I don't want it to be tight, like I said before. So I'm going to add 20 and then subtract 2 millimeters. So like I said, I have 189, and then I'm going to add the 20, subtract the 2, and I wrote it all down already. And so my center panel is going to be 207 millimeters wide. And then the same thing for the length. You're going to take your length, and I have 651 for the length. And so I'm going to get 669 by adding 20 and subtracting 2. So you're just adding 18. In this case, I have 4 doors the same size for the vanity, so all 4 doors are getting the same size panel. So I just mock up 1 door in the dry fit stage, and I measure it, and now all my panels are going to be the same size. So that's it, 2-second deal. So I have my clamps ready, my parts laid out, my glue is ready. I have a damp rag here with a little water in a bottle. This way I can wipe off any little bit of squeeze out and get that out of the way so it doesn't harden up on the joints, because you don't want to have to scrape that off later and sand it all off, because it's kind of a pain. So I'm going to start off by this time putting the panel in place. It's just going to make it a little bit easier to get the rails in. Okay, now for the glue joint here, we're going to make sure that we get a good coating of glue on the inside of the joint here. A little bit on the tongue, and just a little bit on the tongue here. You don't want to get too much in the corner where it's going to hit and give you too much squeeze out. And also put a little bit in here, just a dab inside the groove, just like that. I like to come down eye level with this, and you can see I already have way more squeeze out than I would like. So I know that on the next panel, on the next part of the panel, I'm going to do a little bit less. Now, if you're working with a stain grade, you have to be careful when you're wiping the glue with water, because you don't want that glue showing up in your finish, because if it's stain grade, the stain will actually have a discoloration spot. It's absolutely horrible to look at. Any glue in the corners, you want to clean it out now, because you don't want to have to try to scrape it out later if it gets hard. So we're going to just do our best to get all the glue out as we go. And then when we clamp it, there is going to be some more squeeze out. Then we'll have to also wipe it again. Type-on 3 gives you a lot more open time, but also this is a vanity and there will be moisture in the air. So I also like to use it for that reason, that it has waterproof qualities. Okay. Okay, so now with this part here, since I have it in the upright position, what I'll do is put some glue down on the tongue and groove right here. Now you want to take your time with this. So you want to make sure that you have enough glue coverage where you're not going to get a failure. Come right over here, flip it over, and get ready to drop it on. Okay, that side's in. It's in right there. Now I'm gonna start to apply a light pressure just to bring the joints together, but not enough where I'm not going to be able to readjust the sides, because I want to make sure everything is completely flush. Now you should always test fit your doors. So I've gone ahead and installed the hinges. I'm just going to do a quick test fit, show you guys how these look. Have everything all measured out so that they snap on. Let's check the first one. Now it's not going to hit the MFT because it's 2 millimeters up above the bottom, so it won't drag on there. Okay, let's put on the other side. Let's check this one. Now we're going to check our reveals all the way around. I can already see this door is a lot lower, so I'm going to have to raise that up and then move it over also. Okay guys, so that's it for this week's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that if you are trying to tackle a project like this and you need to make cabinet doors, cope and stick doors are something that you can make relatively quickly on a router table. If you have a shaper, I'm yet to get a shaper. I'm kind of in the process of kicking things around with getting a shaper, but basically a shaper is a router table on steroids. It's minimum like 3 horsepower, and you will get these done in a matter of like minutes. So a shaper is a whole different animal. I'm looking into getting one because I'm doing a lot of production of cabinets, and I do a lot of doors and drawers, and I'd like to get a shaper eventually so that I can just do these a lot quicker. But relatively quick doing it on the router table. It's not terrible. I only had 5 doors to do, so it wasn't too bad. But when I do large kitchens and I have 25 doors and drawers to do, and they want a profile on the drawer fronts also, and well, that gets a little daunting to do on a router, and you know, the bit kind of burns out a little faster than it would on a shaper because the carbide is much larger, and it's completely different. It's just basically a shaper is, you know, if you have large amounts of doors and drawers to do, you get a shaper, which I'm going to do once the budget allows. But for now, the router table, I've been making cope and stick doors on the router table for years with those Freud bits, and I'm going to link those in the description for you so that you can purchase those if you are interested in doing something like this. Also, don't forget that the ones that I have are not the only profiles that they make. They have other profiles that they sell. So you can just, I'll link the one that I have, but you can go ahead and check out all the other variety of the cutter heads that they have, which also they even a little bit cheaper. If you don't want to get the set that has the raised panel bit in there, then you don't have to get that. Now that'll save you some money also. The set will be much cheaper without that extra bit in there. Okay guys, so thanks for joining me in the shop. I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. I hope that this gives you the courage to make your own doors, and I hope to see you next time. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, hit the picture of a notification bell, and also check the description box below for all the links of the tools that I used. All right guys, thanks for joining me in the shop, and I'll see you next time.